I'll start.
हाँ.
Okay. So we'll be doing ergodic theory, so which is basically dealing with group actions on measure spaces. So first of all, let G be a group, and for us, G will always be a countably infinite group. Is it visible?
Just 1 second. सबको दिख रहा है क्या? मुझे जी नहीं दिख रहा वो.
हाँ जी नहीं दिख रहा है मुझे.
थोड़ा लेफ्ट में.
Yeah. So, and omega A mu will be a measure space, and most of the times we'll be dealing with probability measure spaces. So first we'll state the general result. So we'll recall the change of variable theorem. So suppose we have two measure space. So we have a measure space x1 e1 mu, and we have a measurable space x2 e2, and we have a measurable map phi between them. So essentially something like x1, x2, and we have a measure mu on x1, right? So what we can do is we can push forward the measure on x1 to get a measure on x2. So if E is a measurable subset of x2, then what we can do is we can take the inverse image and apply mu on the inverse image to get this number. So this will be a measure on x2. So what the theorem says is essentially like if we take a function f, say complex valued or non-negative real value, then integrating f on x2 under this new measure is the same as integrating the composition with respect to the original measure mu. So to state it more formally, if f is from x2 to closed 0, closed infinity, measurable, then, and yeah, we'll just denote this measure by mu composed phi inverse. So if f is measurable, then what we have is that the integral of f with respect to the new measure is the integral of f composed phi with respect to mu. And this is the first one, and second one is if f is from x2 to, now we take a complex valued function. Then f is a, and it's obviously measurable. Then f is in L1 mu composed phi inverse, if and only if the composition is in L1 mu, and in this case the integrals will again be equal. So we will be repeatedly using this result. So is this side visible, below left hand side?
Yeah, it's visible. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so this is the change of variable theorem. So now again let's get back to our probability space, and we'll introduce what is a measure preserving transformation. So first of all, it will be a bijection. If phi is measurable, and we'll also require the phi inverse is also measurable. And for every measurable set E, we have measure of phi inverse E is equal to the measure of E. And we can easily see that if phi is a measure, so by MPT I mean measure preserving transformation, then phi inverse is also a measure preserving transformation. In fact, more is true. That let's say we will denote this to be the space of all measure preserving transformations. So this forms a group. It is easy to see this. What is the good thing about measure preserving transformations is that by the change of variable theorem, we get that. So for by that I mean L1 or non-negative valued measurable functions, we get integral f d mu is equal to integral f composed phi d mu, because in this case this measure mu composed phi inverse will be mu itself. So this is an important thing. Now we define measure preserving So we will take a group and act it on the measure space in a measure preserving way. So that's why we have a group homomorphism like this. Okay. So yeah. So is this fine so far? Like any suggestions? Should I write more, write less? Or go
No,
faster,
perfect.
slower?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's fine. I feel.
Okay. So can I erase the left hand side?
Yeah.
Just wait for maybe.
Yeah.
Okay. And I don't have a clock nearby, so someone tell when like it's around 10 o'clock. Okay,
Chinmay, shift
so
the board again on the right.
on the right.
The left side is not visible enough.
Okay.
A little bit. Ah, yeah, perfect.
Okay. Yeah. So the next object we'll look at are like Hilbert spaces and bounded operators on them. So first we'll recall what is an adjoint operator. So if X is a So X is a bounded linear operator from a Hilbert space to another. Then X star will be from H2 to H1. It will be the unique bounded linear operator satisfying X star eta inner product xi is equal to inner product of eta and xi for all eta in H2 and for all xi in H1. So this is what is the adjoint of an operator. Again, we'll recall what is a unitary. So U from H1 to H2 is a unitary if is an isometric isomorphism. So this means that obviously U is linear, linear, and U is 1 1 on 2, and norm of and U preserves the norm. So norm of U xi is norm of xi for every xi in H1. Okay, so this is equivalent to saying so U is a unitary if and only if both of these things should happen, that U star U is the identity on H1 and U star is identity on H2. So this is a unitary operator, and in this case we can see that U star will be the inverse of U. Okay, so from this you can easily see that composing two unitaries will get a unitary because unitary is an isometric isomorphism. So what we get is that U of H piece of all unitaries from H to H, this forms a group again. So so we'll again define so this is what will be a unitary representation of G. So we'll be dealing with these frequently. So I'll just take a look. Yeah. So we'll make a remark that X is an bounded linear operator on a Hilbert space, and let K be a closed subspace. So I mean a vector subspace of H, and suppose K is invariant under X. Then we'll get that K perp is invariant under X star. So this is quite easy to see actually. So if xi is in K perp, then for every xi prime in K, we have X star xi inner product xi prime is equal to inner product of xi x xi prime. But since x K is invariant under X, we have X xi prime is also in K, so this will be 0. So that means hence X star xi will be in K perp. Okay, so yeah. So now suppose we have a unitary operator U. And K is invariant under U. Then we take the restriction U from K to K. So this won't necessarily be a unitary. So this will be an isometry. But this need not be onto because something outside K can still go to K. But what we have is if K is also invariant under U star, then we have U restricted to K from K to K is a unitary. So we just need to show that this is onto. So if xi is in K, what we can take is U of U star xi is xi. But U star xi is in K since K is also invariant under U star. So we have U restricted to K is also onto. So what we can do is if we have a unitary and closed subspace of H is invariant under U and U star, which is also equal to U inverse, then we get that the restriction of U on K will again be a unitary on K. So we'll keep this in mind. Again, can I erase this left side? Yeah. Okay. So there are some sounds outside my window. So is anyone facing any disturbance?
No, it's fine.
No, it's okay.
I can hear it, but
Yeah,
it's fine.
just shift your board a bit to the right. I mean, the left
Okay,
side is
okay,
again not
okay.
visible.
To the right.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, yeah. Sure. Okay.
Okay. Yeah. So now suppose we have so let's say pi from
Okay, okay.
sorry. Oh. Unitary representation. Then so by pi invariant, I mean that K is invariant under pi of G for every G in capital G. Then let's say pi tilde from G given by G goes to So this is because since the range of capital G is closed under a star operation, because pi of G inverse will be pi of G whole inverse, which will be pi of G star. So since this happens by this remark, we get that uh, pi of G restricted to K is again a unitary on K. So this will be a unitary representation on K if K is pi invariant. And in fact, we get more. So notice this remark. So here it says that if K is invariant under X, then K perp will be invariant under X star. So since the range of this pi will be star closed, we get that K perp will also be uh, pi invariant. And hence you can again restrict the representation to K perp and get a unitary representation of G on K perp. So is it fine so far?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So now, so we have seen measure preserving transformations by a group and also unitary representations. So we'll find a natural way to tie these two. Okay. So now let's start with and action of G on omega, which is measure preserving. So uh, okay, so this is again a made up notation. So I'll call this to be space of measurable functions. Okay, and this will form a vector space. So what we can do is we can represent G as a space of linear maps on this vector space. So say, let's say like G2. So this just means linear maps. There is no norm, nothing. So no question of bounded linear or anything. So what we can do is we can take phi G and acting on F is, so this we want again to be a measurable function on omega. So we define this thing applied on X is simply F of G inverse X. So this is, you can check that this is linear and this is in fact representation. So let's see that. So obviously if G is the identity element, then this will be just phi G of F will just be F, and phi of G1 G2 F. So this evaluated at X will be F of G2 inverse G1 inverse X. This is nothing but phi of G2 applied on F evaluated at G1 inverse X. And this is phi of G1 evaluated at phi of G2F, and this whole thing evaluated on the point X. Yeah. So phi is actually a representation because phi of G1 G2 is phi of G1 phi into phi of composed phi of G2. So yeah, and note that if F1 is equal to F2 mu almost everywhere, then phi G F1 will be equal to phi G F2, again mu almost everywhere. So this is because G is measure preserving. I mean the action is measure preserving. So it's fine so far. Yeah, okay, fine. So now how do we get a unitary representation of G from here? So we have a natural Hilbert space associated to any measure space, that is L2 mu, and we'll attempt to give a representation from G to U of L2 mu. So like we already have this measure preserving action of G on omega. So what we do is we just take the restriction of this action on L2 mu. So we just define pi G f of x will be equal to f of G inverse x. And because of this remark, this thing will does not depend on the uh, like choice of f, because if f and f1 and f2 are equal almost everywhere, this thing will also be equal almost everywhere. This is again linear, but we have to check that this thing is actually in L2, and further this pi g is a unitary. So these two things we need to check. So if once we check that, then pi g1 g2 is pi g1 pi g2 will be clear by this calculation we have made here. Okay, so we'll check that this thing is in L2 and this pi g is a unitary. So to check that, what we'll do is we take norm pi g f square is this is integral but this G inverse action of G inverse is a measure preserving. So by the change of variable, we just get this is integral mod fx square d mu, because this is a non-negative valued function, which is just norm f square. So this is the L2 norm. Yeah. So this means that pi g is an isometry, and since pi g inverse equal to pi g inverse pi g equal to pi of the identity element t, which is just the identity on L2 mu. This means that pi g is invertible. So hence pi g will be a unitary. So conclusion: if G is acting on omega in a measure preserving way, then we get a representation so we get this representation so given any measure preserving action of G on a probability space, we get a unitary representation of G on L2 mu, and this representation is called Koopman representation. So this is just a name. Okay. So now one thing we observe is that if let's say C is a complex number, then the constant function that means pi g C is equal to C for every G in G. So if we take the one-dimensional subspace spanned by the constant function 1, is mm, is pi invariant because every point in this subspace is fixed by uh, pi. Okay, so so this is not very interesting because we already here it's trivial what is happening. But then what we have seen before is that if something is an invariant closed subspace, its perp will also be invariant. So that is what we'll be dealing with more. So
Chinmay, just a second.
yeah.
So what do you mean by when you say G acts on omega measure preserving transformation?
Oh, so yeah, sorry. So so by that I mean G. So we have a group homomorphism from G to measure preserving transformations on omega mu, right?
Yeah.
So this will be some function. Let's give it some name. I don't know, psi. Let's say. Then G
Okay.
will go to psi of G. So this will be a measure preserving transformation on omega, and I am just abusing notation and denoting psi G of X as Gx. Yeah, I should have mentioned this. Is it fine?
Okay. Okay. X is an element of MP mu. Okay.
X is an yeah in omega.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So
Okay.
psi G will be a measure preserving transformation on omega.
Yeah.
So by psi,
Okay.
I'm writing psi G of X as just Gx,
Okay.
like we
Okay.
usually do in
Yeah.
group
Yeah.
actions.
Yeah. Sure. Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Chinmay, also, can you tell me why pi g is unitary?
Why is?
Pi g unitary?
Oh, yeah. So, is it clear it's an isometry?
Yeah.
And because of this, it is invertible. So, it will be onto by this line.
Okay.
So, I mean, it's an isometric isomorphism.
Huh.
So, yeah. So we defined the unitary like that.
Oh, didn't you say it has to be U star has to be identity?
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean that, yeah, I mentioned that it is an equivalent condition. So,
Oh, okay, okay. Wait.
yeah.
So the equivalent condition is it is unitary.
So it is an okay, I'll write it here. So isometric isomorphism if and only if U star U is identity on the domain and U star is identity on the range. So both these things should be satisfied.
Oh, okay, okay. This was the
So
equivalent.
isometry means just this first condition.
Hmm.
And if both of these are together satisfied, that is equivalent to saying it's an isometric isomorphism.
Hmm. Okay, cool. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay. So any more questions? Because now I'll be defining ergodicity. So it's better if these things are clear. Okay, I'll continue. So what's the time?
You have
Hello.
15 minutes now.
9:43.
Okay, then I'll just define ergodicity and stop maybe.
Yeah.
So is it fine if I go this slow, because I think like all of us have time, that's why it should be fine. But
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
okay. Okay. So yeah, we'll come to ergodicity. So okay, so I mean, as far as I know, like ergodic theory like started from the observation of the behavior of gases in a like container. I don't know what the conditions on that container were. So what was observed statistically was that over time, so if we have some gas particles here, so over time they'll be going uh, everywhere in the container. So that is what was observed. So this property was called ergodicity. So we'll be using the same definition for ergodicity. So here, so what by time we mean like, so if we take a particle and it's here at say time 0, then after time 1 it goes here, and after time 2 let's say it goes here, something like that. So this is like an action of z on this space. So like say n takes this particle to the place where it will be after time n, or minus n will take it to where it was before n seconds, say, yeah, like that. So this is like an action of z on this system, right? If we want a more continuous picture, then we'll take an action of r. So after time t where the particle is going, or before time t where the particle was there, so like that. So yeah, so mainly like a lot of times what people do is they don't care about what happens before 0. They'll just care about what is happening after. But since like we are dealing with groups, so we cannot take n most many times. We have to take something like z. So we have to observe the behavior throughout time, even like backwards. So we will generalize this z to g. But unfortunately, for now, we won't be dealing with such cases because we are taking only countably infinite groups. So this study can be generalized to, let's say, locally compact groups, but we won't be doing that now. Okay, so this is, so the setup is similar. Like we have an action of G on some measure space, and the action is measure preserving. And what we want is that if we take some region and then take the orbit of this thing under G. So let's say it goes here and it goes here. So this thing should cover the entire space. Okay, so uh, let's see like what conditions are necessary for this to happen. So since G is countably infinite, so obviously if we take a subset here, but this thing has measure 0. So, so this is E and V of E is 0. Then the orbit, like, so by orbit we mean wherever E goes under the action of G. So that is union. So if measure of E is 0, then obviously this thing will have measure 0 because the G is a measure preserving action. I mean, the action is measure preserving. So each of these things will have measure 0. And since this is a countable union, the measure of the whole thing is also 0. So obviously it cannot happen that this thing covers the whole thing. Fine. So we'll take the, so we'll be forced to consider the case where mu of E is non-zero. So still in general, it's not necessary that this will cover the whole thing. So ergodicity precisely means that we force the condition that if this necessary condition is satisfied, then the orbit will go everywhere. By everywhere, we mean mu of G belongs to G, GE. So by everywhere, we mean almost everywhere. So this measure should be 1 because we are taking a probability space. So I'll write the definition. So we have G acting on measure preserving transformation. I should actually say action. So this action is called, is this visible?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if for every measurable set which has measure non-zero. This means that so this is the definition of ergodicity.
Can you do this little bit up? Like just
Okay,
a little.
yeah, sure. Right here. This is a measure preserving action. Implies okay, this is fine.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
So in a way, I mean, we can say that this is like a measure theoretic analog of a transitive action. So because there is like only one orbit. So if we take anything which is like not the measure zero set, then under G it goes everywhere. So this is like the transitive action analog in this scenario. Okay, so maybe if I like, I probably have like 5-10 more minutes. So I'll just state some equivalent conditions and maybe we can prove them next time. So, so we have, so we'll define some things. So again, measure preserving, then so a measurable subset is called invariant under this action if the action by any element in G essentially keeps E where it is. So by that I mean that G, E and E should essentially be the same. So that means like whatever symmetric difference is there should be measure zero. Uh, okay, so this is what is called an invariant. Again, this thing. So I'll just. I mean, again, I have sigma algebra and measure. I won't keep mentioning it. So. Something is called strictly invariant if G is actually equal to E for all G. So here it's just essentially equal and here it's actually equal. Okay, so we'll state our first result. So again, we have a action Z preserving and so we have some equivalent conditions. So first is action is ergodic, which means every positive measure set goes like its orbit is almost the whole thing. So second is if So if both of these have non-zero measure, then let's say here so if we have this A and this B, then what we want is like after the action of some element in G, we get somewhere here. So we get an intersection with B. Then there exists some G in G such that so it actually intersects non-trivially. So that means the measure of the intersection is positive. So third is so this means that yeah, this is self-explanatory. So like we cannot have something which is so if something is invariant, it is like almost nothing or it is the entire thing. So these are the obvious cases where it will always be invariant. But here we are saying nothing other than these obvious cases stays invariant. And again, yeah. So it is equivalent to saying any strictly invariant subset has satisfies this. So so this condition appears stronger than this one. So it is like for proving something is ergodic, it is easy to show 4. But when we know something is ergodic, we can actually assume 3. So this is like the advantage of showing this equivalence. Okay, so what's the time? Maybe I'll stop now.
I guess it's a good time.
10:55.
Huh?
Yeah, 9:55.
Okay, then yeah, I can stop probably. Is that okay?